Welcome to the channel where shadows spin webs of treachery and truth cuts like a blade through the dark. If you're not subscribed, smash that button, turn on notifications, and brace yourself for an epic journey about the one we all know and love. The West African Peace Summit was a glittering mirage, a stage where diplomacy cloaked a battlefield of hidden agendas, each move calculated to shift the balance of power. Held in Dakar's Le Sanctuaire, a marble fortress of a hotel, its towering white walls and fountain of clasped hands promise unity, but the air crackled with unspoken threats, civil wars, contested borders, and foreign debts that bound nations like chains. 14 heads of state arrived, each trailed by security details and secrets, their footsteps echoing on polished floors. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's president, entered without fanfare, his presence a quiet earthquake that shifted the room's gravity. Known for expelling foreign militaries and upending regional power dynamics, Traore moved with the precision of a man who trusted only his own senses, his eyes scanning for the faintest crack in the facade of civility. At his side were 3 aides, 2 guards, and Dio, his intelligence officer, whose gloved hands and unblinking gaze were a silent warning to anyone who dared meet his eyes. The summit room was designed for intimacy, a circular mahogany table, nameplates meticulously placed, and 2 water glasses per delegate, pre-poured and sparkling under crystal chandeliers that cast prisms across the walls. But the details were wrong, deliberately so, each anomaly a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Traore's chair had been shifted from its assigned spot beside Guinea's president to a position between 2 ministers from nations he hadn't engaged in months, their smiles too polished, their eyes too guarded. The water glasses, identical to the untrained eye, held a subtle flaw. His left glass was 8 millimeters fuller than the right, the liquid catching the light differently, as if whispering a warning. To most, it was nothing, a server's oversight, a quirk of chance. To Traore, it was a neon sign, a Russian-crafted trap, laced with a poison like polonium-210 or a metabolic inhibitor, designed to kill silently and fracture a nation. Russia, with its deepening influence in the Sahel, saw Traore's defiance as a direct threat to their control over uranium, gold, and strategic influence. This wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was a calculated move to destabilize Burkina Faso's growing autonomy, to shatter its resolve, and to send a chilling message to the region: defy us, and pay the price. The human brain is a marvel of pattern recognition, its amygdala wired to detect threats before conscious thought can process them, a primal radar honed by survival. Traore's mind, forged in the crucible of coups, insurgencies, and betrayals, didn't just see the glass, it read the room's pulse, mapping anomalies like a cartographer charting a storm. The shifted chair, the overfilled glass, the faint smudge on the table where a server's hand had lingered too long, these were discordant notes in a carefully orchestrated symphony, each one a clue to a larger design. As the summit opened with ceremonial calls for unity, Traore's eyes stayed fixed on the table, his mind sifting through details others overlooked, his senses attuned to the rhythm of danger. He leaned toward Dio, his voice a whisper, barely audible over the hum of air conditioning and the drone of speeches. "You see it?" Dio's gaze swept the room, pausing on the ministers, the servers, the exits framed by velvet curtains, their deep red folds hiding shadows. "It's in the rhythm," he murmured, his voice low, precise. "Something's off-key, like a drumbeat missing its cadence." The meeting began, a parade of speeches about cooperation, denouncements of foreign interference, and appeals for peace, each word polished but hollow, a veneer over the tensions simmering beneath. Traore was playing a deeper game, his brain's prefrontal cortex, the seat of strategy, working in tandem with his amygdala, keeping his senses razor-sharp, alert to the slightest deviation in the room's choreography. Midway through an Ivorian envoy's droning address, its platitudes fading into background noise, Traore turned to Minister Diallo of Niger, seated to his right, and asked, "Do you find the water here to your liking?" The question was soft, almost conversational, but it landed like a blade, slicing through the room's false calm, its edge honed by intent. Diallo's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering for a split second, a micro-expression of fear, a crack in his carefully constructed mask. Then, too eagerly, he raised his glass and drank deeply, as if to prove his innocence, his hand trembling slightly as the liquid touched his lips. Fatal mistake. Within minutes, his face paled, his words slurred, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. By the time medics rushed in, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, he was convulsing, not dead, but compromised enough to be wheeled out on a stretcher, his eyes wide with shock. The room erupted in hushed chaos. Cameras cut, doors sealed, whispers sharpened into accusations, the air thick with suspicion. Traore sat still, his face an unreadable mask, watching not the spectacle but the players, their reactions betraying their roles in the game. The poison wasn't the endgame. It was the opening gambit, a spark to ignite panic and shift suspicion, a move designed to unravel the summit from within. The brain's fight-or-flight response can betray even the disciplined, exposing cracks under pressure. Diallo's sip was a reflex, driven by fear of exposure, his amygdala overriding reason in a moment of crisis, pushing him to act before he could think. Traore, though, operated above fear, his mind a chessboard where every piece was accounted for, every move calculated with chilling precision. The Russians had banked on chaos to mask their plot, but they'd underestimated Traore's ability to read the board and rewrite the rules in real time. He called for a recess, excusing himself with polite ambiguity, his voice calm but his eyes sharp, missing nothing. He led his team down a marble corridor lined with gold-framed mirrors, their reflections fracturing the tension, each step deliberate, measured. They entered a private diplomatic suite, sealed from surveillance, its walls soundproofed, its windows tinted against prying eyes, a fortress within a fortress. Inside, Traore dismissed the guards, their boots echoing as they retreated, and locked the doors with a soft click that felt final. He faced his inner circle, Dio, his intelligence chief with a mind like a steel trap, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, Captain Outera, head of security, whose loyalty was forged in the heat of combat, his posture rigid with readiness, and Kasi, his young, brilliant aide, whose eyes always lingered too long on details, as if reading a script only he could see, his silence now a weight in the room. Silence filled the suite, colder than the air conditioning, heavy with unspoken questions that pressed against the walls. Traore placed both untouched water glasses on the table, their condensation leaving faint rings on the polished wood, like ripples of a warning spreading outward. "Which one of you knew before I did?" The question wasn't an accusation, it was a scalpel, cutting through pretense, exposing raw nerve, its precision surgical. Dio stepped forward, his voice steady as granite, his eyes meeting Traore's without flinching. "The seating was wrong," he said, his tone measured, deliberate. "I suspected a deviation but couldn't confirm a threat without evidence. I needed more time to cross-reference the patterns." Outera, more defensive, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles widening, spoke next. "I oversaw catering clearance," he said, his voice tight, almost accusatory. "The water was sealed when delivered. If it's tainted, it happened here, or the hotel outplayed us. I'd stake my life on my team's diligence." Kasi, though, said nothing. He looked down, his hands still, his breathing shallow, barely perceptible, his silence a deafening admission in a room where every sound carried weight, every pause a confession. The brain's mirror neurons make us mimic others' actions, but they also expose us, revealing truths we try to hide. Kasi's stillness wasn't calm, it was fear, frozen in place, his amygdala screaming under the weight of guilt, his body betraying what his words wouldn't. Traore opened a sealed water bottle from his leather briefcase, its cap cracking with a sound that echoed like a verdict. He poured 3 fresh glasses, the liquid catching the light like a challenge, and set them before his team, their surfaces rippling slightly. "Drink," he said, his voice low but unyielding, carrying the weight of a command that brooked no refusal, its tone a quiet storm. Dio drank immediately, his face unreadable, a man who'd faced worse tests and emerged unscathed, his composure a shield. Outera hesitated, sniffed his glass, his eyes darting to Traore, searching for a trap, then followed, his throat bobbing as he swallowed, his reluctance a faint crack in his armor. Kasi reached, not for the fresh glass, but for one already on the table, fogged with age, left by the hotel staff hours earlier, its surface dull, uninviting. A trap within a trap, a moment of instinct betraying calculation, his hand moving before his mind could stop it. Traore's voice dropped to a whisper, colder than the marble walls, sharp enough to cut through bone. "You're too smart to be that stupid, Kasi. Who gave you the vial?" Kasi's lips trembled, his eyes wet, glistening under the suite's dim lights, his face a map of fear and shame. "They said no one would die," he stammered, his voice cracking like thin ice, each word a struggle. "Just a scandal to weaken you. Moscow's orders through a contact in Mali. They have my sister, my mother. They showed me photos, timestamps, proof they could reach them. They said they'd kill them if I didn't comply." The twist wasn't just betrayal. It was coercion, a cruel manipulation that turned loyalty into a weapon, a blade held against Kasi's heart. The Russians hadn't bought him. They trapped him, leveraging his family through operatives embedded in a mining consortium with ties to Kremlin-backed Wagner Group remnants, their influence a shadow across the Sahel. The brain's limbic system, wired for survival, can make even the loyal bend under threats to loved ones, fear overriding duty, love twisting into compliance. Kasi wasn't a traitor by choice, he was a pawn, his devotion to Traore fractured by terror, his every move dictated by the dread of losing those he held dear. Traore didn't flinch, his face stone, but his eyes flickered with something, not pity, but understanding, a recognition of the human cost of this brutal game. His mind was racing, piecing together the broader design with the precision of a master strategist, each fragment of evidence a thread in a tapestry of betrayal. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a dossier labeled Serpent's Coil, its edges worn from months of study, its pages heavy with the weight of foresight, each one a map of survival. Inside were intercepts of Russian communications, crackling with coded references to the Shepherd's Well, a metaphor for Traore himself, a satellite photo of a closed oil terminal in Sierra Leone, its docks lit by covert activity, where a diplomatic pouch had been rerouted under the cover of night, and a floor plan of Le Sanctuary's kitchen, where a water delivery had been diverted through a Kremlin-linked shell company posing as a Senegalese bottling firm, its invoices falsified, its trucks unmarked. The poison was just the opening move, a feint to distract from the real plan, a narrative, seeded through media handlers and whispered to journalists in smoky backrooms, to paint Traore as paranoid, unstable, a leader who couldn't trust his own water, unfit to steer Burkina Faso's defiance of foreign powers. The Russians aimed to erode his legitimacy, weaken his grip, and open the door for a puppet regime more amenable to their interests, one that would cede control of the nation's resources and strategic position. But Kasi's confession and Dio's triangulation had flipped the board, turning the hunter into the hunted, the predator into prey. Dio produced a folded paper from his inner pocket, a ciphered log, decoded minutes before the recess, showing a burst of data transmitted from a burner device 2 floors below their suite, its signal faint but unmistakable. The sender used an internal code known only to 3 people, and Kasi was one, his access a key that had unlocked his own downfall. "You thought I wouldn't check the secondary airstrip manifest," Dio said, his voice hard, cutting through the room's tension like a wire. "A diplomatic pouch arrived at 3:14 a.m., tagged as medical supplies. It contained 2 vials of non-traceable metabolic inhibitors. One's missing, and we know where it went." Traore stepped closer, his presence a quiet storm, his eyes locked on Kasi's trembling form, his gaze unrelenting but not cruel. "You weren't meant to succeed, Kasi," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, carrying the weight of truth. "You were meant to create panic, discredit us, turn suspicion inward. We'd chase phantoms while Moscow's real agenda, control of our minds, our borders, our future, slipped through unnoticed, a shadow moving faster than we could track." Kasi's eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist, his hands twitching as if grasping for a lifeline that had already slipped away. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice breaking, raw with desperation, each word a plea. "They promised no one would die. It was just enough to shake your position, force elections. You'd be weakened but alive. They said they'd let my family go if I followed through. Traore's face didn't soften, but his eyes held a flicker of recognition, a nod to the human cost of this brutal chess match. Who is they? He asked, the question a demand wrapped in calm, its weight pressing down on Kasi like a stone. Kasi shook his head, his voice barely audible, a whisper lost in the room's cold air. It won't matter now. They've moved to Phase 2, and it's already in motion. The words hung like smoke, a warning of a deeper plot unfolding beyond the summit's walls, a shadow stretching across borders, its edges sharp with intent. The room shifted into high gear, the air electric with urgency, the silence replaced by the hum of action. Dio called in the embedded cyberops team, their screens flickering with data streams as they locked all internal frequencies and cross-referenced hotel staff rosters with known aliases, their fingers flying across keyboards, tracing digital footprints. Altera deployed silent signals to rooftop overwatch units, their scopes trained on cleared rooftops, their comms buzzing with coded updates, each one a pulse in the network of defense. Traore stepped into an adjacent chamber, its walls lined with maps and encrypted consoles, their screens glowing with faint green light. He opened his briefcase again, its leather worn but unyielding, and withdrew a folder marked Continuum Disruption in his own handwriting, a protocol drafted months earlier, when whispers of a coordinated reputational attack had reached him from sources in Mali and Ghana, their voices hushed but urgent. The dossier contained 3 items: a satellite image of the Sierra Leone terminal, its docks lit by covert activity, shadows moving under floodlights, a blueprint of Le Sanctuary's water filtration system, marked with vulnerabilities where a single valve could taint a supply, and a photograph of a man who'd once served in a Russian advisory unit, now embedded as a press attaché to a West African delegation. His smile too polished, his eyes too cold, his presence a thread in the web of deception. The poisoning was never the objective, it was the distraction, a sleight of hand to cloak a narrative designed to erode Traore's legitimacy, to paint him as a leader unhinged, a nation on the brink. The Russians had planned to flood media channels with stories of a summit gone wrong, a president paranoid, a government crumbling under its own weight. But Traore had seen the pattern, smelled the betrayal before it could take root, his instincts sharper than any intelligence report. The summit reconvened that evening in a banquet hall aglow with gold chandeliers and imported orchids, their petals trembling in the air-conditioned breeze, the scene a study in false harmony. Traore, dressed not in Western suits but in a deep indigo robe with mossy embroidery, his grandfather's ceremonial weave, a symbol of lineage and defiance, sat deliberately off-center, out of the media's frame, as if daring them to miss him, to underestimate him again. The traditional toast was moments away, each delegate to raise a crystal flute of French red and recite, "May peace feed our people faster than profit feeds our fear." A poetic ritual, born of bureaucrats chasing grandeur, but Traore had rewritten the script, and the stage was his to command. As the toastmaster stood, clearing his throat, his voice faltering under the weight of the room's tension, Traore rose, holding not wine but a carved wooden cup, centuries old, bound in bronze wire, its surface etched with symbols of resilience, its weight a reminder of history. The servers froze, their trays trembling, their eyes darting to unseen handlers. The cameras panned, lenses glinting like eyes, capturing every moment. The room tilted with curiosity, then tension, as every delegate sensed the shift, their breaths held, their hands hovering over their glasses. "Before we toast," Traore said, his voice steady, amplified by sheer gravity, cutting through the hall's murmur like a blade through silk, "let me tell you of Sanfi, the shepherd who survived poison twice, once by accident, once by memory." He paused, letting the silence sink into every delegate's bones, their eyes locked on him, their minds racing to decode his intent. "Sanfi learned the taste of betrayal," he continued, his words deliberate, each one a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. Slowly, he appended his empty cup, placing it flat on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot, its finality a challenge to the room's fragile order. "Tonight I drink nothing. Not from your bottles, not from your rituals. Peace is swallowed in truth, not wine." The hall didn't erupt, it froze, time itself seeming to pause, the air thick with unspoken questions. Forks paused midair, glinting in the chandelier light, their reflections dancing on the table. A Russian attaché, posing as a trade delegate, shifted in his seat, his eyes betraying a flicker of panic, his fingers tightening around his napkin, crumpling it in his fist. The brain's fight-or-flight response was kicking in, but he was trapped in Traoré's spotlight, unable to flee without drawing more attention, his every move a confession. Stories are the brain's currency for making sense of chaos, and Traoré's tale of Sanfi wasn't folklore, it was a psychological weapon, a narrative that forced the room to question their own glasses, their own loyalties, their own safety. Mirror neurons fired in the delegates' minds, mimicking his suspicion, amplifying the tension until it was palpable, a living thing coiling around the table, its presence suffocating. The Russian operative stood, muttered an excuse about an urgent call, and slipped out, his footsteps too quick, too loud in the silence, betraying his haste. 20 seconds later, two others, a Sierra Leonean envoy and a Malian consultant, followed, their exits too synchronized to be coincidence, their faces tight with suppressed fear, their eyes avoiding the cameras. Traoré's cufflink communicator buzzed, a faint vibration against his wrist, a signal from Dio's cyber ops team. They had just released encrypted files, phone logs, emails, and satellite footage tying the operative to a Moscow-backed NGO fronting as a medical charity, its funding traced to a labyrinth of shell companies. The live stream, routed through a neutral Ghanaian channel Traoré had arranged hours earlier, caught every twitch, every glance, broadcasting the unraveling to the world, its reach amplified by social media platforms where hashtags like #TraoreDefiant began to trend. The banquet ended in stiff silence, plates cleared with a clink of silver that echoed like fear, the sound of a room holding its breath, its occupants afraid to move, to speak, to drink. Traoré remained seated, sipping from his wooden cup, filled with water from Ouagadougou, untouched, unfiltered, sacred, drawn from a well his ancestors had guarded through centuries of strife. Outside, journalists scrambled to rewrite their headlines, their initial drafts of Summit Chaos, morphing into Traoré's Defiance, their fingers racing across keyboards as the story went viral, shared across continents in real time. But the real story was unfolding in the shadows, where Traoré's network was already moving, silent and relentless, a web of trust that stretched beyond borders. 3 days later, in Burkina Faso's capital, he stood on the rooftop of an unmarked government building, the Ministry of Memory, a place where patterns, rumors, and old treaties were archived alongside digital whispers and elders' songs that had predicted invasions and droughts with eerie precision. The building was no bureaucratic monolith. It was a repository of intuition, a sanctuary where the past spoke to the present, where fragments of history were woven into warnings that guided the future. In his hands was a parchment, no signature, only a red spiral in the corner, drawn in faded ink like a sigil of intent, its curves a silent promise. It named the Russian attaché, whose devices had since malfunctioned, whose interviews were cancelled, whose allies were recalled without explanation, their diplomatic immunity quietly revoked, their influence severed like a thread cut from a loom. The brain's reward system craves closure, but Traoré's power was in withholding it, letting the silence do the work, letting fear grow in the void. No arrests, no public statements, just a vacuum, the kind that terrifies, a silence where doubt festers and alliances crumble. His network wasn't soldiers or drones, it was trust, woven through market stalls, hotel reception desks, embassy cleaning crews, and village elders who'd retell the story by firelight, their voices carrying the weight of truth, the president who tasted betrayal and made the poisoners choke on their own shame. A week later, Traoré walked barefoot through villages, speaking with blacksmiths, storytellers, and children, his presence a quiet ripple in the dust, his words simple but heavy with meaning, each one a seed planted in the hearts of those who listened. His visits weren't captured by cameras but by griots, whose long memories would carry the tale for generations, a leader who walked into a hall of enemies, refused their cup, and turned their poison into a legend that would outlive empires, a story told in whispers, in songs, in the quiet moments when truth outshines lies. On the 7th day, he returned to Le Sanctuaire's fountain at midnight, alone, not as a president but as a pilgrim, his silhouette stark against the marble basin, the night air cool against his skin. He poured water from a gourd into the fountain, water from his homeland, alive with the taste of earth, unfiltered, untainted, drawn from a well that had sustained his people through centuries of struggle. The fountain pulsed, a gentle ripple spreading outward, as if the stones themselves exhaled, acknowledging the act, recognizing its weight. "The well is clean," he whispered, his voice soft but resolute, a vow to the night, a promise to his ancestors. He turned to go, his footsteps silent on the stone, leaving no trace but the ripple, which lingered like a heartbeat, a testament to survival. Behind him, across Dakar's embassies, consulates, and private dining rooms where false peace had been toasted, a chill spread, not of fear, but of recalibration, a silent acknowledgement that the game had changed, that the board had been reset. The Russians had failed, and Traore, a man who drank only from his own cup, had rewritten their script, turning their weapon into his triumph, their poison into his power. Days later, in Ouagadougou, the nation held its breath, not in fear but in anticipation, a collective pause as if the land itself were listening, its pulse synchronized with its leaders. Traore's victory wasn't trumpeted in headlines. It was felt in the quiet nods of market vendors, the songs of griots, the whispers of children playing in the streets, their voices carrying fragments of the tale, their laughter a defiance of the shadows. The Russian attaché resigned, citing personal exhaustion, though insiders knew no illness had touched him, only the weight of exposure. His office found an envelope, no return address, containing a single sentence on coarse parchment. "We drank memory." Across 3 cities, Dakar, Bamako, Freetown, encrypted files continued to leak, exposing Moscow's network of proxies, their shell companies, their coded communications, each revelation a crack in their armor. The world moved on to other stories: a market crash in Frankfurt, a scandal in Lagos, an earthquake near the Red Sea. But in Burkina Faso, the ground had shifted, and Traore stood at its center, a keeper of patterns, a reader of betrayal, a man whose power lay not in force but in the trust of a people who knew he'd never drink from a poisoned well. The summit's echoes lingered, not in news cycles but in the quiet places where power is truly shaped, in the marketplaces where vendors whispered of Traore's defiance, their voices low but proud, in the villages where elders nodded as griots sang of Sanfi, their songs weaving history into prophecy, in the minds of those who'd watched the banquet unfold, their own glasses untouched, their trust in rituals shattered, their eyes open to the truth. Traore's act wasn't just survival, it was a reclamation, a reminder that a leader who sees the patterns, who trusts the taste of memory, can turn poison into power, can bend the arc of history with a single gesture. And as the weeks passed, the story grew, not in headlines but in the oral traditions of a nation, in the firelight tales that would outlast empires, a saga of a man who walked through shadows, refused the cup of his enemies, and emerged with the truth in his hands, his heart a wellspring of resilience, his legacy a ripple that would never fade. What do you think about this story? Make sure to comment your thoughts below, and subscribe if you're in support of the man.